The lies, the misnomers, the confusion, and the litigation of the 2020 election, as well as what happens if we can't sort it all out. That is what will be discussed here on today's episode of the show. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Josiah Evertson, and this is The Glorious Rescue.
Aren't you tired of feeling forced to choose between staying informed and being indoctrinated? Listen to the condensed news cycle without the lies, agendas, and confusion from the mainstream media, all while engaging in deeper discussions about the principles that have influenced our great nation. This is what rescuing America looks like. This is The Glorious Rescue.
Welcome back to another episode of The Glorious Rescue. As always, it is another Tuesday, another Friday, which means another episode of The Glorious Rescue. Don't forget to always stay tuned for the continued updates here. If you remember in our last episode, we went through a really entire breakdown of what was happening in the election. I believe I released it a little bit early to stay pertinent in the election because the situation is so fluid. If you haven't checked that episode, I recommend you do so. And also, if you are listening on the audio platforms, I recommend you head on over to the YouTube channel as well. I know most people were on the audio platform specifically for the last episode, but last episode on the YouTube channel, we actually blew up a map and we actually went through it piece by piece, state by state. And I believe even by the time that the majority of people watched it, the whole entire situation has already changed. So Joe Biden has been named the presumed president of the 2020 election. I want to remind you that that does not mean he is the president-elect. He has been titled in some instances by some media outlets, the president-elect, but that is substantially different than the presumed president. We're going to get into why that is, and we're going to get into all that is the fraud, the possible fraud, the probable fraud, the unlikely, likely fraud, and then also sorting it all out, how and why to work through it, and then also what happens. What happens if it can't get sorted out? Just remember, this is 2020, so everything is possible. So first things first, no one should be contesting the idea of voter fraud. Really, that's honestly a very uncontroversial idea, voter fraud. In the very wise words of Ronald Reagan, he said something along the lines of, if you want something messed up, just ask the government to do it. So it is highly likely a voter fraud. In fact, it is absolute, basically. The government handles the election, and so there's bound to be some errors, some overprints, some mess ups. People, specifically the government. So there are going to be mishaps. Voter fraud is something that has historically existed, but on a very miniature and minute scale. It's possible, it's probable, and it is absolute that it does happen because we're dealing with people, and we're specifically dealing with the government who very often makes mistakes. Nevertheless, the question really is how much voter fraud, how much of this fraudulent activity is going on. It's a matter of how much, and it's also a matter of is it enough in certain states to swap and change the margin of error. Is the margin of error in that voter fraud enough and as large as the margin of difference between votes for Joe Biden and votes for Donald Trump? Now, those people who are contesting the idea of voter fraud even existing are the same people back in 2016 who stated that Russia was involved and completely rigged the entire election. Remember that. Remember that those were the people who stated back in 2016 that the election process can't be trusted, that it's fragile, basically that it's hanging in the balance and is able to, at whim, be manipulated by an entirely foreign government. Those are the exact same people that are saying, yeah, extra ballots can't be turned in, ballots could be adjusted. Those same people. So remember the hypocrisy there. The question is it on a large enough scale to change who the presumed president, again, is and what the outcome of this election is? That's what we're going to get into a little bit. We're going to look at a little bit of evidence, and we're going to understand how can this affect the outcome and how does it apply to us today. So we're going to go through some of those cases. Really quickly, going back to one item. I know I went back to the idea of the hypocrisy of the Democrats in regards to how they view the election because this time it's in their favor. So of course they want everyone to accept it. But I want to move back to one more thing before moving through that actual evidence and some of the evidence that is suggesting such. And that is this. The Democrats, the mainstream media, and the Biden presidential campaign are assuming and claiming him as the president-elect. They are moving forward with the assumption that he is. The media outlets, the Biden campaign, all of them are administrating, are even addressing Joe Biden as the president-elect. That is inaccurate because The litigation is still in process, and because a candidate has not conceded, that means that Joe Biden is not the president-elect. He is the presumed president of the United States. Big difference. So, why are they treating him as if he were the president-elect? It is because if litigation goes through, votes are swept out, the ones that are invalid and illegal, and let's say Trump actually comes back with the win for presidency, it now looks like Joe Biden was the president and Donald Trump stole it from him. If the Biden campaign, if the Democrats or Democratic leadership, or if the mainstream media went ahead saying that Joe Biden is the presumed president, there's still litigation involved and we are still unsure, and then litigation goes forward, Trump becomes the next president, that doesn't create the storm that the media wants. Instead, they'd rather claim Joe Biden as the president, then litigation goes through, Trump wins the presidency. Now it looks like, or now they can claim that Trump stole this presidency. It's the PR stunt. It's the PR stunt that the media outlets, that the left, that the Democratic leadership wants to portray. That is unfortunate, and yet that is what the American people are stuck with. Because the left, the Democratic leadership, the mainstream media outlets care more about what their portrayal of the story is, what their subjective sense of their reality and what their PR looks like to the American people, than the actual vote and voice of the American people. That is what we are stuck with as the American people. So let's go into it. First of all, Trump's response, Trump's statement in regards to the election, the outcome of the election when Joe Biden was declared the presumed president. He issued a statement a few days back saying basically the election is not over. The false projection of Joe Biden as the winner is based on results in 4 states that are far from final. In fact, I believe there's actually 7, I want to say. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. Some more likely than others to flip Donald Trump. But he says Georgia's headed for a recount. This is not Donald Trump specifically, but a member of his party. Georgia's headed for a recount where we are confident we will find ballots improperly harvested and where President Trump will ultimately prevail. They talked about Pennsylvania, Nevada being challenged because of irregularities and also illegal ballots. Arizona's too close to call, they say, and he's on pace to win it. They talked about the irregularities in Pennsylvania, having officials prevented from being able to watch them count the ballots. Nevada, they said that there appears to be thousands of individuals who improperly cast their mail ballots, which ended up actually being valid. We're going to look at a little bit of that. So he basically outlined several instances and where it looks like things are invalid and reasons why Donald Trump could still become the president. So how can he become the president? Well, let's step back and just say one thing. If Donald Trump, if we count just the legal ballots, if Donald Trump still lost, I think all Republicans really in general would say that is fair, that it's fair to concede, and that it is okay for Joe Biden to be president. Obviously, we would disagree with him and his entire policies, but we would be willing to concede the presidency to Joe Biden. That's obvious. I also would say if that happened, and in the process of all this litigation, all of the voter fraud is completely exposed, struck down, and the entire system is reworked to eradicate that, that would be an astounding win for Republicans. That would be an astounding exit for President Donald Trump. He would go down in history as being the president who went out, yes, kicking and screaming per se, and the left would always try to label him as the one who wasn't willing to give up his presidency. But he went out and his last final act was leaving a legacy of removing illegal voting situations, processes that enable illegal votes. That would be amazing. Consider his Supreme Court nominations, the people who have passed now and are placed into the Supreme Court. Think of all the deregulation, the tax cuts, all of these items that, yes, Joe Biden will try to work around packing the Supreme Court, things like that. But to leave that final legacy of eradicating voter fraud on a large scale, that would be indescribable. That would be astounding and a great legacy for the Republicans, for the American people. But, again, that's assuming that Donald Trump does lose this throughout the litigation. I would say it would have to be very, very bad. The voter fraud would have to be so astounding, so incomprehensible that Donald Trump comes back from this. Not necessarily in the popular vote. And I don't mean extensive as far as in numbers, but I mean nationwide. Because it would mean that there is voter fraud in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Nevada, all different regions of America. It'd have to be continental. It would have to be nationwide, this voter fraud. Again, I seem to want to bristle up against it because I'm very evidence-driven, but the evidence is starting to come through. One example that I've heard is the idea of the presidency watermarking ballots or marking ballots to where it was like a sting operation. So now they can bring forth that evidence. I don't know about the credibility there. It is interesting. There is some evidence to suggest that. You can go and do your research there. We don't have enough time in this episode to really uncover that and go through all of that, but it is possible. And who knows? It could come out. It could come out. And if it does come out, it will come out in this litigation. Throughout this entire process and all these lawsuits, if that were the case, that the ballots were marked to track the entire process, things will come out. Whether or not they did that, things will come out because things are coming out. For instance, in Michigan, there were switches and all kinds of errors because of a system glitch at first is what was thought. And many people were contesting this, but here's an example. A Republican candidate in Michigan, literally someone in Michigan actually lost their race. And after they fixed this software, he won. He will literally now take the seat after losing the election because of this system glitch. And now people are saying it's a hoax. It doesn't exist. It has literally happened. We're going to talk about this. It doesn't necessarily seem to be a software glitch or something like that, but there was an actual switch from 3,000 votes, I believe that went Democrat, that were supposed to go Republican. So obviously it created a 6,000 vote margin of error. And it's now the reports are being updated that it seems to be more of like a software collecting an update issue and not like a glitch per se. It just randomly did it. But the reports are coming out now that the equipment and software aren't necessarily malfunctioning and glitching, and that the ballots were properly tabulated, counted, but that there was an accidental input and they did not update the software properly. The clerk did not. That is what's starting to come out here. That one seems to be more accidental, but that same system was used in several counties, 47 counties to be exact, in Michigan. Not sure if it were 47 counties nationwide or 47 counties. I would imagine nationwide. This system was used nationwide in many, many states. That's Michigan, Wisconsin. It seems like clerks were allowed to, quote unquote, fix ballots. The idea of the signature, you have to have a signature of consent if someone else places it for you, or if you vote yourself, you have to have a proper signature that's validated. And when those signatures weren't proper, the clerks were given permission to fix the ballots. Seems odd. In Nevada, there were thousands that have been confirmed, at least 3,000, possibly up to 6,000 votes that were cast that those individuals had already left the state. They were not registered in Nevada. Interesting data. Again, let's get a couple things right, and that is first and foremost, we can't assume this was intentional. However, if all of the voter fraud favors one side, we can start to guess, surmise, that it was intentional. Again, we also cannot surmise that all of this amounts up to actually changing the candidates. We talked about even in the last episode where we talked about hundreds of thousands of votes and ballots being counted for Joe Biden, a single candidate, none going to Donald Trump, that were automatically counted at a single time and updated in the system in Wisconsin and Michigan, I believe it was even so. So there's all kinds of instances and evidences. Again, if the whole idea of watermarking and ballots being tracked and that type of data being discovered, that will be found in the litigation process. Again, there are good wins. Trump in Pennsylvania, in a Pennsylvania court, was found that his poll examiners were allowed to go and watch it, and that it was illegal and wrong for the recording office to push their poll watchers out. They also ruled that the ballots that were cast and not postmarked and came in after the election were to be separated from the other ballots. Doesn't mean they're not being counted yet, but they're being segregated. Trump's making progress. Litigation is in progress, even going up to the Supreme Court. But now, the fun part. What happens if the courts don't figure it out? What happens if this whole thing comes crumbling down, which could happen again, like I said, because it is 2020, and who knows in 2020? What happens? There's a few things. First of all, this is going to the Supreme Court. We know that. The Supreme Court has even been meddling and working through, I shouldn't say meddling, that sounds derogatory, but working through this entire situation. They could rule a few different ways. They could rule, and when evidence is brought up in certain instances, they can rule and strike down certain items within those instances, like the Pennsylvania case. If they find the case with Nevada, Arizona, all these swing states, and they find different instances with fraudulent activity, they can bring those individual pieces, lawsuits, hearings to the Supreme Court, and they can individually work through those. But as a whole, what happens? What they could do is render the vote invalid. I don't want to get too far into that because How the system works is our election is an electoral vote. In the case of the electoral vote being tied, it then falls into the secondary method of presuming who the president is, of claiming and declaring who the president is, to be more clear. So the first process is the electoral college. If it were a tie, it moves into the second, which I will now describe in just a matter of time. So it would seem to indicate that if the Supreme Court rules that this first system, the electoral system, has been flawed and needs to be reworked, that they would move into the second line as well. The Supreme Court hasn't done that, but it could happen. And what is that system? Here's how it works. It's a matter of delegation for the states. The House of Representatives picks the president, and the Senate picks the vice president. That's how it works. But it's not actually that. It's not what you think of. The House of Representatives taking a vote, picking the president, and the Senate taking a vote, picking the vice president. What it actually goes by is delegates. And so each state gets a delegate. There will be 50 delegates. So it's not just majority versus minority. It is by delegates. Each state gets a delegate. And it's basically declared by the state legislators, by the party that runs those states, you could say. The House picks the president, the Senate picks the vice president. Both Republicans hold both majorities across the states. So there are 99 chambers across the states. There are 50 states. So there would be 100 chambers. In each state, there's a House, there's a Senate. So 50 in each is 100. But you subtract one because Nevada has a unicameral system. So we'll actually throw Nevada out of this analogy, you could say, or this hypothetical. 98 houses, 49 states, each have a House and a Senate. That's 98. 98 chambers. 59 of those are held by Republicans, 39 by Democrats. Meaning across the states, all 50 states, the Republicans have 59 houses and senates, and the Democrats have 39 houses and senates. Now, when we look at the national level, we have a split House and a Senate. That is very, very uncommon for states. Most states have a Republican House and Senate or a Democrat House and Senate. The party controls both. It is very rare. Right now, there's only one divided legislator. Although it's very common on the national level, it's very uncommon in the state level. So 98 chambers, 59 of them held by Republicans, 39 by Democrats. Next is the idea of legislature control. There are 49 legislators. Again, I'm not going to say 50, talking about Nevada. I'm going to toss that one out. For the other 49 states, there's the legislature, the House and the Senate. And they are all held by one party, except for one, like I mentioned, that is divided. In 29 states, Republicans hold the House and the Senate. And in 19 states, Democrats hold the House and the Senate. Basically, let's say 30-20 is how it's split. Republicans have the control of the entire legislature in 30 states. They have the House and the Senate. And on the Democratic side, they have 20, House and Senate. That's how it's split. That's how the delegates will run. Meaning if it went to that second line, Trump has the victory because it'd basically be a 30-20. Again, that is assuming A, there's enough fraudulent activity for the entire thing to be questioned by the Supreme Court, and B, the Supreme Court rules to follow that second line of electing the president rather than just specifically trying to work through the data behind voter fraud. Those assumptions have to be met. Now, I know we are running out of time and I don't want to spend too much time on this end of show segment, but it has been requested, and so I want to hop over into a segment of the vast past. Moving into the vast past, I don't want to do what we normally do, which is mention a certain item, a certain book, person, ideology throughout human history. Rather than doing that, I want to do something that was a little bit more requested, and that is mention some books that I would recommend. History, politics, economics. On whatever platform you're using, I recommend that you pull out a pen, pull out a piece of paper, or just pull up your notes on your phone to write down a few of them that interest you. I'm going to kind of go through just a couple of them here with all of us on the show. Again, this was a little bit recommended, so I'm going to move right on into a few of them. That is one being this one that I have right here. That's why the book's set up on today's episode. This is Ben Shapiro's How to Destroy America in 3 Easy Steps. This is an amazing book, and not only is it political, but it is also historical. That is why I think it fits very well into this category. He talks about our American culture, our American systems. He addresses the actual issues of the left. He doesn't just talk about policies and here's why they disagree on policies and things like that. But he talks about what the real attack is. The real attack isn't just the anti-cop sentiment, for instance. It's what it is the left pushing this culture that the entire American principles, the entire American system is wrong, flawed, systemically racist. And so therefore we must tear down the system, and those in the uniform represent that system to enact and arise a brand new system for social justice. Highly, highly recommend you read this book if you're interested in history or politics in general. It's a good combination of the both. America's shared history, our shared politic, our shared systems, all of that, and what the real attack is, and how to unify under those American principles that brought us together throughout all of our history, how we can reunite under those same principles. I also have another one, don't have it here, but The Debris of Battle, a good historical book on the Civil War. Civil War was very terrible, very awful, and it was definitely our worst war. We did not lose as many men in any of our other wars, even World War II, where we sent many, many millions of men over. We didn't lose as many. Civil War, we lost 500,000 men. And in fact, many of those were brothers fighting against brothers. And the fight was even sometimes against our own blood. Another one I have is right here, Churchill's Trial. I love Larry Arnn. I love his writings. I love his books. I definitely recommend you head on over to Larry Arnn's writings, his books, and Hillsdale College as well. Churchill's Trial is about just that, Churchill. And he doesn't go through the biography of Churchill as chronological, but thematically. So he talks about him in certain themes, him as a war general, him as a politician, him as statesman. And he goes through the different themes of Winston Churchill. You know, Winston Churchill is one of my favorites. Definitely check him out. There are many, many things we can learn from Winston Churchill. Another one right here is Charlie Kirk's MAGA Doctrine, the only ideas that will win the future. I will warn you, Charlie Kirk and I would probably disagree on a little bit more than some of these conservative writings. I find him a little bit Machiavellian, meaning the end justifies the means. Kind of the idea, well, illustrate it like Mitch McConnell back in 2016 with the Supreme Court, and now in the Supreme Court in 2020 with the election and people coming up and Supreme Court nominations. Charlie Kirk would be that type of guy, saying one thing when it helps him and saying the other when it doesn't. A couple things I disagree with him on the book, specifically on foreign policy. Don't want to get into, don't have too much time, but I'm 100% grateful and stand behind what he does for our nation. It's very good, engaging the youth. I just wanted to warn you about that. Next would be this book right here, Imprimis. And Imprimis is actually a speech digest put on by Hillsdale College. This is a compilation of those, a compilation of also historical books, historical excerpts, speeches that I definitely recommend. It's a good compilation book if you're into those different themes and lots of different items that you can discuss there. Just a few, to name a few: Larry Arnn, Milton Friedman, Clarence Thomas. Very, very good book, a compilation book that I do enjoy. I also want to mention this one, The Reagan Diaries. This one's fun. It's literally the diaries of Ronald Reagan. You really get to see that personal side of him. A larger book, but again, it's excerpts. So take your time and enjoy the little bits and pieces that you like there. I'm going to mention a few of them that I don't have here for all of us here on the show. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, where he talks about the Glorious Rescue, the name, the theme of the show, and really what moved our American patriots to declare independence from the tyrannical British crown. Lewis's Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, George Orwell's 1984. Churchill also literally wrote dozens of books that I recommend you go through. Also, another one would be Thomas Aquinas. He's the philosopher back hundreds of years ago, so be careful when you start reading into his philosophy and things like that. But specifically, he did develop a lot of proof and how we can philosophically and through reason prove the existence of God. That is specifically what I would look into. Don't confuse yourself with a lot of the rest, but look at Thomas Aquinas's theories, not theories, but writings and excerpts on proving the existence of God. Another one, this is more of a gag gift. Michael Knowles wrote a book, Reasons Why We Should Vote Democrat or something like that. Michael Knowles, Reasons to Vote Democrat. It's literally a blank book. So you can find it, I believe, even on Amazon. But if you want to get a gag gift there for your Democratic or liberal friends, Reasons to Vote Democrat by Michael Knowles, a completely blank book. Excerpts for you, I would recommend going through the Federalist Papers. Those are a good one. Commentary on the Bill of Rights and our Constitution. Definitely recommend the Federalist Papers. Also, look through our president's inaugural addresses. Lincoln's, specifically George Washington, some of those main founding, although I know Abraham Lincoln wasn't a founder, but main founding characters of our nation. Look through inaugural addresses. And then I would go back to John Locke, Edmund Burke, Adam Smith. Men like that. We talked about in episodes 10 and 12, I believe it was, John Locke and Adam Smith formulating the idea of human rights, formulating the idea of economics and free market enterprise. Those are key episodes if you want more of a, yes, more in depth than this right here, but more of an overview rather than going into their well-written but deeply written books. Also, going back to the Reagan Diaries, we did an episode 13 in the end of show segment, where we went through some of the funny moments of Ronald Reagan. Definitely recommend you go back there. But episodes 10 and 12, we talked about John Locke and Adam Smith, respectively, but also Edmund Burke as well. We had an episode there. These were men who formulated the idea of the origin of human rights and the application of those human rights in government. Very founding and fundamental to our American systems, principles, documents, and even to our founders that I 100% recommend you go through and study, but also get that overview from episodes 10 and 12. Well, I want to thank you very much for being with us, for enjoying this episode with us. I know I went a little bit long, but I appreciate your time, your patience, and I appreciate you always continuing to tune in and the growth and the sustained growth with the show. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening as well. I'm Josiah Everton, and this is The Glorious Rescue.